A chill rolled across the open fields just as the sun began to rise, washing the land in a pale light that made every shadow seem longer than it should be. It was the kind of morning when even the quiet held a certain weight, as if the world sensed something unusual was about to unfold. That was when the rancher first heard the cry. It wasn't the sharp call of a bird or the bark of a coyote. It carried a different tone, low but urgent, almost trembling. He paused, one hand resting on the worn fence rail, listening hard. Again the sound came, and this time it was closer. A wild mare stood at the edge of the trees, her chest rising fast, her dark mane tangled and trembling. Her eyes were wide with something that wasn't fear alone, but a plea, raw and desperate. The rancher had seen that mare before. She kept her distance like most wild ones did, protective and distant, a creature shaped by the freedom of open land. But never had she come this close, and certainly never had she called out like that. At first he wasn't sure if he should step toward her or wait. Something in her stance held him still. She didn't move away when he approached, not even when he whispered soft words meant to calm her. Instead, she turned and limped deeper into the brush, pausing now and then as if making sure he followed. Confusion crept through him, but curiosity pushed him onward. Animals didn't act like this without reason, and he felt deep down that something was terribly wrong. Branches shifted under his boots as he stepped into the shaded path the mare had taken. The trees grew thicker, muting the light, and the air smelled of damp earth. The mare trotted ahead, glancing back repeatedly with that same urgent expression. The rancher's heart beat faster. Something about this felt too deliberate to ignore. He'd always believed animals had their own ways of reaching out when trouble struck, but he had never experienced anything so direct. Soon he heard a soft, weak noise that didn't match the mare's earlier cries. It sounded strained, like a breath trying to steady itself but failing. There, tucked in a patch of tall grass, lay a foal. The small creature struggled to stand, its legs shaking under its weight. The rancher recognized the signs of exhaustion and distress. The mare rushed to the foal's side, nudging it gently, her worry clear. He knelt down, taking in the scene with growing concern. The foal seemed newly born, its coat still damp in patches, but something wasn't right. It tried again to rise but slipped back, letting out a soft, painful sound that twisted the rancher's gut. The mare looked at him then, not with fear but something closer to trust, as if she knew he could help when she could not. He spoke low and soothing, easing closer. The foal didn't resist his touch. Its breathing was shallow, and its movements were weak. He felt a surge of responsibility wash over him. This wasn't a choice anymore. He couldn't leave them there, not when the mare had clearly sought him out. It struck him how strange that was. Wild horses avoided human contact. They didn't seek out ranchers, especially not for help. What pushed her to break that barrier? What danger had she faced out there alone with her newborn? These questions pressed at the back of his mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. He gathered the foal gently, lifting it with careful arms. The mare followed close, her breath brushing his shoulder. She moved with a shaky determination, her eyes darting around the woods as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Every crack of a branch made her tense. He half expected her to bolt, but she stayed beside him all the way to the open field. Once they stepped into the sunlight, she hesitated only for a second before pressing forward again, never letting him out of her sight. Reaching the barn, he set the foal on a blanket near the entrance where fresh air flowed freely. He worked quickly, checking for injuries, offering water, and wiping away dirt. The mare stood just outside the barn door, pacing in tight circles and letting out soft nickers. She wanted to come inside, he could tell, but instinct held her back. Her hooves shuffled nervously against the ground, each sound striking the rancher with a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. As the foal rested, regaining a bit of strength, he stepped outside to face the mare. She stared at him with a guarded intensity. Something was haunting her, something more than the struggle of birth or the weakness of her foal. Her sides rose and fell in uneven breaths. He'd seen animals shaken before, but this was different. She kept glancing toward the distant tree line, ears flicking backward as if she expected something to come after them. He turned to look too, but the land remained still. Nothing moved except the slow sway of grass in the morning breeze. The rancher felt a strange chill crawl across his skin. Something was off. He could sense it in the way the mare wouldn't settle, how she kept stepping away from the barn only to return moments later. It was as if she wanted to run back into the woods, yet something held her back, something that had driven her to find him in the first place. The foal's condition explained part of her panic, but not all of it. Wild animals survived harsh conditions all the time. They didn't usually seek help unless pushed to their limits. He walked back inside to check the foal again. The little one lifted its head now and looked around with tired eyes, showing signs of improvement. Relief washed over him, but the weight in his chest didn't ease. The mare's fear wasn't fading. It was growing. Her shadow flickered restlessly at the doorway, and her ears were pinned forward at something he couldn't see. He stepped outside again, scanning the land carefully. That was when he noticed the tracks near the fence. They weren't from horses or cattle. These prints were spaced unevenly, pressed deep into the soil. Something had passed through recently, something large enough to leave a clear mark. He crouched to study them and felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. These weren't familiar tracks from the usual wildlife. He had never seen shapes like these before. They cut across the edge of the property and led straight toward the woods where he'd found the mare and her foal. A sense of unease settled heavily over him. Whatever had driven the mare to seek him out had left these tracks, and judging by the fresh imprint, it had been there not long ago. He stood, turning his gaze toward the distant trees. The quiet felt too heavy, too expectant. The mare let out a sharp snort, stomping her hoof on the ground, her fear rising again. He felt the air shift around him, charged with tension he couldn't explain. Something was out there. Something that had frightened a wild mare enough to run to a rancher for help. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning, and whatever truth lay behind those strange tracks was about to pull him deeper into a mystery he never expected to face. The rancho stayed crouched beside the strange tracks longer than he meant to, trying to make sense of their shape. The soil was still damp from last night's light rain, which made the marks sharp and clear. Yet clarity didn't bring understanding. The prints were deep, too deep for any deer, stray cow, or even a heavy bull, and the spacing was all wrong. Whatever had walked there carried its weight in a way he had never seen before. The realization made him straighten slowly, his eyes drifting back toward the trees where the mare had first appeared. The morning sun no longer felt warm. A tightness settled in his chest, the kind he only felt when something wasn't lining up the way it should. Before doing anything else, he needed to check on the foal again. Even with fear tugging at the back of his mind, responsibility came first. He stepped back into the barn where the foal lay resting. Its breathing was steadier now, though its legs still trembled when it tried to shift. He knelt beside it, brushing away the bits of grass stuck to its coat. The foal blinked weakly at him, and for a moment the tension in his shoulders eased. Life had a way of pulling him in, guiding his hands and calming his mind. But the unease returned when he realized the mare wasn't peering through the doorway anymore. He stepped outside quickly. She had moved several paces away from the barn, staring toward the far end of the pasture. Her body was stiff, head high, ears locked forward. Something out there had her attention again. He followed her gaze, but nothing stirred. No rustle of brush, no shifting shadows, no sign of movement. Still, the mare's posture didn't soften. Her muscles were tight, like she was bracing herself for the slightest reason to bolt. He approached her slowly, trying not to startle her. She didn't back away, but she didn't look at him either. Whatever she sensed out there held all her focus. He wished he knew what she was seeing or hearing. Animals often picked up on things long before humans did. It wasn't the first time he relied on that instinct, but it had never felt quite this alarming. He spoke gently, hoping to calm her. She flicked an ear in his direction, but didn't ease up. He couldn't shake the feeling that the mare wasn't just nervous. She was guarding something. Or someone. Maybe the danger she felt wasn't aimed at her, but at the foal she had brought to him. But why? Wild horses survive threats all the time. It was part of their life. So what made this threat different enough to force her toward a rancher she barely knew? To shake off his thoughts, he went back to the tracks. He knelt again, running his fingers lightly across the edges of the imprint. The dirt around it was disturbed in a strange pattern, almost like the creature had paused or turned sharply. Its weight had shifted unevenly, pressing deeper on one side. He had seen tracks left by predators before, but even those followed a rhythm he could understand. This trail felt chaotic, uncertain, as if the thing that made it was searching for something, or someone. He followed the prints along the fence line for several yards until they eventually veered toward the woods. The closer he got to the trees, the more unsettled he felt. The sound of birds grew faint, replaced by a stillness that didn't belong in the morning. The branches swayed gently, but not even the rustling leaves could hide the eerie quiet. He stopped just before the tree line. Going deeper right now didn't feel wise, not without knowing what he was walking into. On his way back he saw the mare pacing again. She made a wide circle, stopping every few steps to glance at the barn. It was clear she wanted to stay near her foal, but it was just as clear she was torn between staying and running. Fear and instinct pulled her in opposite directions. He wondered where the rest of her herd was. Wild horses rarely traveled alone unless forced to. Had something separated them? Driven them apart? The thought troubled him more than he wanted to admit. By noon the foal gained enough strength to attempt standing again. The rancher guided it gently, supporting its frail frame while it struggled to keep balance. It wobbled, leaned into him, then stood with shaky determination. He gave it a moment before helping it settle down again. Progress was slow but promising. The mare watched from outside, her head dipping in relief whenever the foal managed a small milestone. Still, her nerves never fully eased. Her tail swished anxiously, her breaths came quick, and she kept glancing toward the woods. The rancher stepped outside again and leaned against the fence, scanning the view for the 10th time that day. The vast field stretched before him, quiet and untouched. No sign of danger. Yet the tension around him didn't dissolve. He tried distracting himself with chores, but even simple tasks like checking the water trough or fixing a loose fence board felt shadowed by unease. Every crack of wood, every distant rustle made him pause. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but the air felt charged with something he couldn't explain. Later in the afternoon, while he was brushing down one of the older horses, he heard a quick shuffle behind him. He turned in time to see the mare trotting toward the pasture's far end. She moved quickly, stopping near the fence and staring into the distance again. He dropped the brush and followed her, calling softly. She didn't respond. Her body was rigid, her tail lifted, and her ears pinned so tightly forward it almost hurt to look at her. He reached her side and squinted into the horizon. At first, nothing stood out. But then he noticed a line of grass pressed low, like something had passed through minutes earlier. It wasn't the wind. The pattern was too straight, too deliberate. He walked along the fence to get a better angle. The grass bent in a path leading directly away from the trees. Whatever had made that trail had moved fast. The mare suddenly pulled back, hooves scraping the dirt. She shook her head hard and let out a sharp, frantic call. It wasn't directed at him or the foal, but something unseen. She backed up, muscles trembling. Fear radiated from her so strongly he felt it in his own chest. He stepped toward her, but she jerked away and bolted toward the barn. Her powerful legs kicked up dirt, and she skidded to a stop near the doorway, peering inside as if checking her foal's safety. The rancher ran after her, not understanding what had spooked her so violently. When he reached the barn, he saw the foal trembling again, its ears twitching nervously. Everything felt wrong, too wrong for comfort. He checked the surroundings again, running through possibilities in his head. Could it be a predator? Maybe a wolf wandering farther than usual? A mountain lion moving through unfamiliar territory? But none of those matched the tracks he found. And none would frighten a wild mare badly enough to make her plead for help. There had to be something he wasn't seeing yet. Something out there watching them, waiting for the right moment to return. The thought tightened in his chest like a knot he couldn't loosen. He trusted his instincts, and right now they told him trouble was far from over. As the sun began to dip, stretching long shadows across the pasture, he brought out a lantern and placed it near the barn entrance. The mare stayed close through the evening, barely leaving the foal's side. He sat near the barn door, arms resting on his knees, keeping watch. The quiet around him felt heavier with each passing minute. The foal eventually drifted asleep, its breathing slow and steady. The mare dozed lightly, waking at the slightest sound. The rancher kept his eyes on the fields, watching for movement. He had no intention of letting anything come near them. Hours passed and the world dimmed. The lantern flame flickered in the growing darkness, casting long shadows across the barn walls. He shifted his weight and rubbed the back of his neck, the tension never leaving. He didn't know what the night would bring, but he knew something was lurking in the quiet. Something that had driven a wild mare to trust a human. Something that wasn't done yet. And as the darkness settled, he felt the first sense of being watched. The rancher stayed still for a long moment, letting the darkness settle around him. The feeling of being watched crept slowly up his spine, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, unsettling way that made his instincts sharpen. Years of working the land had taught him to trust those instincts more than anything. They rarely misled him. He shifted slightly on the hay bale he had been sitting on, careful not to alert the mare or her foal. Both needed rest, even if he wasn't going to get much of it. The lantern's glow flickered in the light breeze, stretching shadows across the barn walls. As he looked out into the open pasture, he tried to pick apart every dark shape and listen for anything that didn't belong. The night was usually filled with the soft noises of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the low rumble of cattle shifting in their sleep. But tonight those sounds felt quiet, almost as if the land itself had paused to listen. Something was out there. He didn't know what, but the tension hanging in the air told him he wasn't imagining it. The mare suddenly lifted her head, her ears turning sharply toward the far side of the pasture. Her whole body went rigid. He got to his feet without making a sound. Whatever she sensed, it wasn't close, but it was present. The foal stirred restlessly as if it could feel its mother's fear. He stepped outside the barn and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. The moon was rising, washing the land in a pale silver glow. He scanned the horizon, searching for movement, a shape, anything. For a few seconds, everything stayed perfectly still, then he spotted it. A faint ripple through the tall grass, too smooth to be wind and too deliberate to be random. Something was moving low to the ground, following the fence line slowly. It didn't hurry, it didn't pause. It moved like it already knew exactly where it was going. He reached for the old rifle he kept propped near the barn door. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't naive either. Living on the land required being prepared. Even as his fingers closed around the worn handle, he knew he wasn't planning to fire unless he had absolutely no choice. The goal wasn't harm. The goal was understanding what had driven the mare to his ranch with such desperation. The ripple in the grass stopped suddenly. The rancher held his breath. The mare let out a low sound deep in her throat, not loud but full of warning. He tightened his grip on the rifle and took a few careful steps forward. The moonlight glinted on the fence wire. Beyond it, he still couldn't see what was hiding, but he felt its focus. The same way he felt a predator's interest back when he was a boy rounding up cattle with his father. As the standoff continued, a second thought crept into his mind. What if it wasn't one creature but several? What if this wasn't a lone wanderer but something tracking the mare for days or weeks? The idea made him study the grass more closely. Sure enough, he noticed faint depressions that ran parallel to the first ripple. Another trail, then one more, 3 in total. Whatever had come near his pasture wasn't alone. He swallowed the dryness in his throat, forcing his mind to stay steady. Panic would get him nowhere. He slowly backed up toward the barn, keeping his eyes on the field. He didn't want to alert the mare or frighten the foal. Once inside, he placed the rifle aside and sat near them again. The mare pressed closer to her foal, her body forming a protective barrier. He spoke softly to calm both of them, though he wasn't sure he believed his own reassurances. Morning approached slowly. Every hour felt like 2. The first traces of light broke over the land, and with that light came a strange shift. The feeling of being watched began to fade. Not completely, but enough for him to breathe a little easier. The mare's muscles relaxed slightly. The foal finally drifted into a deeper sleep. When dawn finally arrived, he stepped outside again. The pasture looked calm, peaceful even, as if the night had never held any danger. Birds were singing again. The grass glowed softly with morning dew. But when he walked to the fence line and studied the ground, he saw the truth. The trails were undeniable, pressed into the earth with intention. Whatever had moved through the grass last night had been close. Very close. He crouched down and touched the bent grass blades. The tracks weren't the same as the ones he found earlier near the trees. These were wider, more spread out, a different gait. That meant more than one creature was tracking the mare. And possibly the foal, but why? Wild animals didn't stalk horses this persistently. Predators did, but not in groups like this, and not without leaving more obvious signs. As he followed the trail deeper along the fence, he spotted something that made him stop in his tracks. A section of wire had been bent outward. Not broken, but pushed with enough force to loosen the posts. He ran his fingers over it carefully. Something had tried to get through. Something strong. He straightened slowly, unease crawling back through him. He needed another set of eyes on this. Someone who understood the land as well as he did, but from a different angle. A neighbor lived a few miles down the road, a quiet man who kept to himself but knew every inch of the surrounding wilderness. If anyone could help identify what left those tracks, it would be him. Before he left, he checked on the mare and foal again. The mare was still alert, but her breathing had steadied. The foal managed to stand on its wobbly legs for a few seconds before settling down again. The little thing had a long way to go, but strength was returning bit by bit. He ran his hand gently down its neck before heading out. The ride to his neighbor's land took longer than usual. He found himself looking over his shoulder more than once, scanning the fields and tree lines. Every rustle made him jump inside. When he finally reached the neighbor's property, he explained everything carefully. The tracks, the bent fence, the mare's panic, the quiet night that felt wrong from the start. The neighbor listened with a seriousness that confirmed the rancher's fears. After studying the rancher's sketches of the tracks, he frowned. He said they didn't match anything he recognized, not wolves, not coyotes, not cats. Something about the spacing and pressure points was strange, like the creature was moving wrong somehow. They returned together to the ranch. The neighbor inspected the prints in person, kneeling in silence as he traced them with a rough hand. His brow creased deeper with each second. The rancher finally asked him what he thought. The neighbor hesitated, then admitted he wasn't sure but felt something he didn't like, something that carried purpose. He suggested setting up watch points around the property and checking the woods carefully before nightfall. They spent hours searching the surrounding land. They found more prints, scattered but forming a loose path, a path that circled the ranch in a slow, deliberate way, as if tracking, as if waiting. By late afternoon, they returned to the barn. The mare nuzzled her foal gently, her eyes softer now but still clouded with worry. The neighbor stepped back, lowering his voice as he said the danger wasn't normal. He suggested the rancher keep the mare and foal inside through the night. No chances. The rancher agreed. But deep down, he knew keeping them safe for a single night wouldn't solve anything. Whatever was following them wasn't giving up. As night crept in once more, the rancher stood outside the barn again. This time he had more lanterns lit and placed in a wide circle. The neighbor stayed hidden a few yards away, watching from the shadows. The rancher's heart beat steady but heavy. The land was hushed again, too quiet. The mare shifted restlessly inside, the foal pressed close against her. The night deepened, stretching toward something unseen. The feeling returned, stronger than before. Not just being watched. Being surrounded. The rancher inhaled slowly, steadying himself. Whatever was coming was close, much closer than last night. And this time, he feared the creatures weren't only watching. They were getting ready to act. The night air felt heavier than usual as the group moved along the narrow path that led deeper into the valley. Every step echoed softly against the tall walls of rock that surrounded them. The lantern Farid carried flickered as if it feared the darkness pressing in from every side. No one spoke. They all sensed that something had shifted after the strange signs they had seen earlier. Even the wind had gone quiet. It was as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Mena kept glancing over her shoulder, certain she would see someone following them. She had felt that uneasy pull ever since they left the small camp. A feeling that something unseen watched them from a distance that kept changing. Close at times, then far away, but always present. She tried to shake it off, but the tension sat deep in her chest. Her thoughts bounced between warning the others and keeping silent so she would not alarm them too soon. Ahead of them, Armand slowed down and raised a hand. They all stopped without a sound. The path opened into a wide space lit by the pale glow of the moon. In the center stood the old stone arch they had been searching for since morning. It was tall and covered with carvings that curled like vines frozen in place. The lines were cracked and worn, yet a faint shine seemed to run through them as if they carried a memory of light. Farid stepped closer, studying every curve with the careful patience he was known for. This was the place mentioned in the journal they had found, the place where everything had started, and the place where, according to the same worn pages, the answers waited. But those pages had also warned them that the arch marked the border of what should never be crossed carelessly. A soft chill crept across Mina's arms. The air around the arch felt different, thicker, charged. Armand touched the stone with the tip of his fingers. He pulled his hand back almost instantly. Not because the stone burned or shocked him, but because the surface felt strangely alive, as if the stone itself had a pulse. "We should be careful," Farid said, his voice lower than usual. "This type of carving means it was not meant for everyone," Armand nodded. "But we came all the way here for a reason. We have to keep moving." Behind them, a quiet rustle ran through the bush. All four turned sharply. There was nothing to see, nothing moved. Nothing breathed? Yet the rustle had been unmistakable. Mina's heart knocked hard in her chest, and she swallowed to keep her nerves steady. Lena stepped closer to her, whispering that it was probably an animal. Mina wanted to believe that, but the way the sound had risen and fallen felt too measured, too deliberate. They turned back to the arch. The carvings now seemed brighter than before. Farid unfolded the journal and held it near the lantern light. Armand read over his shoulder as Farid traced the drawn symbols on the page with the ones carved into the stone. The match was exact, down to the smallest curve. "It says the arch responds to intention," Farid murmured. "That those who seek the truth must step through with a clear purpose." Mina felt her hands grow cold. "Clear purpose," she repeated softly. "What if someone's purpose is not pure?" Farid closed the journal slowly. "Then the arch decides." Before anyone could question what that meant, a tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. Dust fell from the sides of the valley. Birds burst out from the trees and flew into the sky in frantic circles. The lantern flickered hard but did not go out. The arch glowed brighter. A thin line of light ran through the center seam, splitting it into two soft halves. Lena gasped and stepped back. "Is it opening?" Armand took a slow breath and moved closer. He reached out, but this time he did not touch the stone. He held his hand just short of it. The warmth he felt was unmistakable, almost like the heat of sunlight on skin, even though the night was cool. "We need to decide now," Armand said. "If we wait, the arch may close, and we might never get another chance." Mina looked at each of them, searching their faces for certainty. She found determination in Armand's eyes, curiosity in Farid's, worry in Lena's. She felt all three emotions inside herself. Her breath steadied as she realized they were standing at the edge of something that would change everything. Just as Farid lifted the journal again, another rustle sounded behind them. This time louder, firm, heavy. All four turned, the bush shook, and shadows shifted near the rocks. Farid lifted the lantern high, but the light did not reach far enough. The shadow moved to one side, then the other, almost circling them. Mina could not look away. Her pulse hammered with growing fear. "Show yourself," Armand called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The shadow stilled. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into the faint moonlight. The group tensed, but the figure did not come closer. It stood at a distance, keeping its form half hidden in the dark. Its posture was neither threatening nor calm. It simply stood there. Lena whispered, "Do you think it followed us from the village?" Farid shook his head. No one from the village could move that quietly. Mina narrowed her eyes. The figure was wrapped in something that shimmered softly when it moved. Not metal. Not fabric, she recognized. Something in between. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying them the way they were studying it. Armand stepped forward. "We're not here to harm anyone. We came to understand what happened. If you know something, speak." The figure did not respond. It took one slow step toward them, then another. Not hostile, controlled, purposeful. The closer it came, the clearer its outline became. It looked human at first glance, but something about the way it moved felt different, as if it carried a weight of knowledge that none of them could imagine. Mena felt a wave of pressure push through the air. It was not strong enough to knock her back, but it tugged at her senses. Her legs felt weak. Her breathing grew shallow, yet she could not pull her gaze away. The figure stopped several steps before the arch. It looked at the glowing stone, then at the group. Slowly, it raised an arm and pointed directly at the arch. Then it lowered its hand, turned, and stepped back into the shadows. They waited for it to reappear, but it did not. The valley fell silent again. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Farid shook his head. "Whatever it was, it wanted us to go through." Armand looked at the arch again. "Then we go." Mena hesitated. What if that was a warning? Armand's tone softened. Or guidance. Farid ran his hand over the journal once more. "The arch is unstable. The light is growing. If we're going, it must be now." The glow around the arch pulsed like a heartbeat. The tremor beneath their feet returned, stronger this time. Small stones rolled along the ground. The seam of light widened. Armand stepped in front of the others. "Stay close. No matter what happens, stay together." Mena moved beside him, gripping her wrist to keep her hands from shaking. Lena followed, taking Farid's arm. Farid held the lantern high, though its flame seemed faint against the rising brightness of the arch. They took their first steps toward the opening. The ground warmed under their feet. The air thickened with a hum that grew louder with each step. Mena felt her pulse sinking with the heartbeat of the light. She glanced at the others. They felt it too. The opening expanded until it stood tall enough for all of them to pass through. A soft glow spilled out, painting their faces with shades of gold and silver. The world beyond the arch remained hidden, but the light promised answers they could no longer turn away from. Mena drew a long breath as they reached the threshold. Her heart pounded. The valley behind them remained dark and still. The path ahead shone bright yet uncertain. She stepped forward. And just as her foot crossed the line of light, the ground trembled harder. A deep sound rose from somewhere beneath them, growing stronger and stronger, until it felt like the entire valley was shifting around them. They were seconds away from the moment that would change everything. The light swallowed them as the trembling rose to its peak. Mina squeezed her eyes shut, thinking the ground would split open beneath her, but the shaking stopped all at once. A warm silence wrapped around her. When she opened her eyes, the valley was gone. The sky above her was bright, but she saw no sun. The light seemed to come from everywhere at once. The air felt calm, almost like the first breath after a long storm. Armand stood beside her, trying to understand what they were seeing. Lena gripped Farid's arm and looked around with wide eyes. They were on a smooth surface that glowed faintly beneath their feet. It stretched out in all directions, but shapes had begun to appear far ahead. Faint outlines, like shadows gathering themselves into something fuller. Farid stepped forward carefully. The journal in his hand reacted to the air, its edges glowing with the same soft light. He opened it gently. The pages were no longer dusty or faded. Every symbol was clear and bright, as if the journal had been waiting for this place to reveal its truth. A soft hum moved through the space. The forms ahead shifted until they became clearer. A group of figures stood in the distance. They glowed with the same calm radiance that filled the air. Their faces were gentle, peaceful, and carried an ageless understanding. Mina felt her fear fade just by looking at them. One of the figures walked toward them. Each step left a soft shimmer behind. When it reached them, it did not speak with words. Instead, a feeling washed over the group. A feeling that carried meaning like language. Armand blinked, unsure if he had heard or imagined it. The voice was inside their thoughts, clear and soothing. You followed the path with intention. You seek answers. You seek peace. Maina swallowed slowly. She felt the voice touching her questions one by one. About the valley, about the strange signs, about the gate that had drawn them in. The figure raised a hand toward the glowing space around them. The light shifted, creating moving images in the air. They saw the valley as it once had been, green, peaceful, alive. People worked together and treated the land with care. But as time passed, conflicts grew. People wanted more control, more power. The valley became a place of struggle, and the energy that rested beneath it grew unstable. The arch had been created to protect the valley, not as a weapon but as a guide, a way for the land to call upon those with pure intention whenever balance was threatened. The journal was part of that system, passed from one seeker to another until the right moment came. Farid held the journal close, understanding now why it had led them here, why the pages had changed when they stepped through the arch. Lena stepped forward. She asked the question in her mind, unsure if the figure would hear it. Why us? The answer came softly. You listened, you observed. You stepped forward without greed? The balanced response to those who carry responsibility without fear. Armand felt a weight lift from his chest. He had always wondered if he had taken the group too far, if he had led them into danger that they did not deserve. But the figure's words eased that doubt. Their journey had not been an accident. It had been a call. The scene around them shifted again. They saw the strange figure that had appeared in the valley before they entered the arch. It had also been a guardian of sorts, a watchful presence meant to test their intention. It had followed them because it sensed their uncertainty. When it saw they did not seek harm, it pointed them toward the truth. Maina let out a long breath she did not know she had been holding. The figure had not been trying to stop them. It had been guiding them toward the choice they needed to make. The glowing beings stepped closer. Their expressions remained peaceful, but the air began to ripple gently, as if something important was approaching. The balance can be restored, but it requires connection. The land must be healed by those who respect it, those who understand the cost of neglect. Armand lowered his head, thinking of the people in the village, the arguments, the divisions, the way the land had been used without thought. He knew this message was not only for them, but for everyone. Farid asked the question that had been growing inside him, what do we need to do? The beings extended their hands toward the group. A soft brightness flowed toward their chests. It felt warm, like a memory of sunlight, peaceful, calm, steady. You carry the knowledge now, return to your valley. Guide your people, teach them what you have seen. The balance does not need force, it needs understanding, it needs unity. The land listens when hearts listen to each other. Maina felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also comfort. They were not alone in this task. The valley had chosen them for a reason. The beings began to fade, their shapes dissolving like morning mist. The space around them dimmed gently, forming the curve of the arch again. The glow softened until Mina could see the familiar stones of the valley through it. Armand turned to the group. Are we ready? Farid nodded. Lena tightened her grip on his arm. Maina stepped closer to Armand and exhaled slowly. They walked together toward the fading light. As they crossed the threshold, the valley reappeared. The ground felt solid beneath their feet. The night air returned, cool and quiet. The arch behind them faded into still stone. The carvings dimmed completely, as if it had given all the guidance it needed for now. The lantern flickered back to life in Farid's hand. Maina looked around. The valley felt different, calmer, still carrying the memory of the shaking, but peaceful now, as if the energy beneath it had settled. Armand took a deep breath. We have a lot to share. They followed the path back toward the village. The walk felt lighter than before. The fear was gone. The purpose was clear. Maina remembered the images they saw in the glowing space. The land healing when people worked together. The valley thriving when hearts were aligned. When they reached the first line of houses, the early morning light was rising over the rooftops. A few villagers were already awake, tending to small fires or preparing for the day. They paused when they saw the group approach. The village elder stepped forward, sensing something different. Armand explained everything in clear words. About the arch, about the guardians, about the balance that the land had been trying to restore. At first, the villagers were unsure. The story felt larger than anything they had known. But as Farid opened the journal and showed the glowing symbols, a hush fell over everyone. The elders listened with care. They looked at Mina, Lena, and Farid. They saw sincerity, not fear. Truth, not imagination. Slowly, the villagers began to understand that what had happened was real. The valley had spoken, and it was asking for unity. The days that followed brought small changes that slowly grew into something bigger. The villagers held discussions without anger. They planned how to restore parts of the valley that had been neglected. They divided work fairly. They listened to one another in ways they had not done for years. The balance returned little by little. The land responded with gentle signs. Healthier crops, clearer water, softer winds, nothing dramatic or strange. Just quiet improvements that proved they were moving in the right direction. Arman, Mena, Lena, and Farid watched these changes with grateful hearts. They continued guiding the community, not with authority but with shared understanding. The valley no longer felt heavy. It felt alive again. Weeks later, Mina returned to the arch alone. She placed her hand on the cool stone. The carvings were silent, but she felt gratitude in the stillness. Not a voice, not a message, just a sense of calm that settled through her. She whispered a quiet thanks before walking back toward the village. The sun was rising behind her, washing the valley in a warm glow. She knew their journey had come to an end, but the lessons would remain for a lifetime. The valley was at peace, the people were united, and the balance they fought to protect would continue to guide them forward. Their story, once filled with fear and tension, had turned into a reminder that unity can heal. Purpose can guide, and understanding can rebuild what conflict once damaged. It was a story that would live on, not through fear or mystery, but through hope.